Caribbean. So let's see if all right. Having a little bit of trouble here getting the slideshow to move, but okay, let's see how we can do this. Today, what we're going to be doing is going over an introduction of the Jubilee event itself and the stamps that were issued in there to commemorate the Jubilee event. We're going to be looking at the Caribbean subset of the Omnibus issues, and I'll explain that in a moment. I do want to take some time to talk about the printers and the printing that took place for all of these stamps. We'll look at some varieties, of course. If you're a philatelist, you're always interested in varieties. And then we'll drop into the Marcophily and postal history associated with these stamps as well. That picture at the bottom is a pretty glamorous looking event. You can see here George V, King George V, and his wife, Queen Mary. And if you look a little bit further back, you can see two gentlemen here. The gentleman on the right, a year after this event, would be the King of England, and he assumed the name of Edward VIII. Edward VIII didn't last all that long. As king, he decided love was more important to him than being royalty, and he abdicated the throne. A similar event took place not that long ago with one of the heirs to the throne bowing out of royalty. Edward VIII was the older of the two sons of George V, and the gentleman you see on the left there became George VI. The woman between the two is his wife, who became Queen Elizabeth and then the Queen Mother. So this is a pretty glamorous looking illustration. George V was known throughout the empire as George the Good, and he was truly, along with Queen Mary, he was truly a beloved ruler. He was also, from long before he became king in 1910, he was a stamp collector, so stamps were very important to him. He ascended to the throne on the 6th of May in 1910. And the planning for the Jubilee celebration, the 25-year celebration, began in early 1934. Obviously, they knew it was coming. They had a head start. They had a heads up. What was interesting, though, is that despite the fact that George was a stamp collector and very interested in all of the stamps issued throughout the empire, the planning for the stamps to commemorate the Jubilee itself didn't begin until December of 1934. Now, this is going to be a May 6th of 1935 celebration. They left themselves only 4.5 months. There were a set of 4 stamps that were issued for the United Kingdom, for the UK itself. Then there were 10 other colonies and dominions that created their own unique one-off designs. And finally, 49 crown colonies adopted the Omnibus issue of 4 stamps. An omnibus issue is where you've got a set of stamps, one or more, I should say, not necessarily a set, but one or more stamps that are issued across multiple stamp issuing entities. And that's what happened here. So 49 colonies issued a set of 4 design identical stamps, and those 49 colonies included 18 Caribbean participants. Here's the list from Antigua down to Virgin Islands of those 18 crown colonies that were issuing those omnibus stamps. For the UK itself, beginning in January 35, this is the stamp that was designed, this is one of 4, again, that were issued, are going to be issued by the UK itself, not part of the omnibus issue. I don't know what your reaction is to this design, but a lot of folks, myself included, continue to wonder why it was that George V, who was a stamp collector and very involved in all these designs, didn't seem to care enough about his own homeland issue, because this is not an especially inspiring or exciting design, especially when compared to some of the other, well, compared to the omnibus issue in particular. What's special about this particular illustration is that is the Prussian blue variation. There were 2 sheets that escaped the postal inspectors and were issued in this variety, this Prussian blue variety. And this particular block was sold at a Spink auction in 2014, £38,400 was the price realized. Plus the Spink, I think 18% tip on top of that, so it was a pretty pricey item. But the omnibus issue itself, the designs only began in February of 1935. So we're really in a rush by this point in time. Waterlow and Sons prepared the master dies of the vignette and the frame. Okay. So here's an example of what the master die proofs look like. And this is for the frame. The vignette would be in the center. The one on the right from the Virgin Islands is in my collection. I bought it probably 10 years ago now at a Victoria Stamp Company auction. That's Phoebe McGillivray's firm, and I paid a crazy amount for it. Keep that term in mind. Crazy is a unit of measure at philatelic auctions, and if I recall correctly, I think I paid 2 crazies for this. 3 or 4 years ago, the Bermuda master die proof on the left also showed up at a Victoria Stamp Company auction, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool to have the 2 of these together in a single collection? There are many of these out there, well, 1 per each colony, so there's 49 of these out there. And I thought it'd be really neat to have 2 of them in the same collection, especially if that collection was mine. So I told Phoebe I was going to show up at the auction, and she warned me that even though I had bid crazy in the past, that Bermuda was a much more highly collected colony than the Virgin Islands, and that there were going to be some deep-pocketed collectors out there. So I'm sitting in the audience, and the bidding opens, for the sake of description, let me call it at half a crazy. And there were a couple of bidders in the audience along with me. I kept my counsel and wasn't bidding, and it got up to 1.5 crazies, at which point a phone bid came in for 2 crazies. Everybody else dropped out. I wasn't going to let it go to somebody else for 2 crazies. I bid 2.5. There was silence. The phone bidder came in at 3. I bid 3.5 crazies. Deep pockets ultimately prevailed. Now, I thought I had deep pockets, but apparently there was a hole in the bottom. All I found was my ankle down there. So I had to stop bidding at somewhere around, I guess the prevailing bid was 7.5 crazies. That was a very, very valuable lesson for me, that however much you want something, if somebody wants it more, they're probably going to get it. But it was a really exciting episode. There was applause in the audience when I bowed my head in concession, and the other bidder prevailed. But he was kind enough to allow me to show the image of this as his property. I guess he could have denied that, but he was a gentleman in the end, and we met. We met at the Javits Center, not for the stamp show, the International, in 2016. That was not long after this little adventure between the two of us, and we had an interesting discussion on the subject. But so this is the master die of the frame. This is what the finished product looks like. This is the Omnibus issue, again, for the Virgin Islands. You can see that the design is identical for both the frame and the vignette. 4 different colors. Each of the colonies used their own combinations of colors, and in fact, each of the colonies used their own different denominations depending on what local postage rates were, and a number of other factors. So these are the stamps from the Virgin Islands for the Omnibus issue. Here you can see an example. Waterlow printed these for the Virgin Islands. You can see an example of the specimens. Those are perfins or perforated stamps, where what it's spelling out, and not necessarily clear to see, is the word specimen. So this is what the straight line specimen for Waterlow looks like. I did mention there were 3 different printers. Waterlow, you can see at the upper left. In the center is De La Rue, which has a curved arc-like perfin with the word specimen. And then down at the bottom left, you can see Bradbury, the third printer, where it's got a horseshoe-shaped perfin, again saying the word specimen. The original estimate for the print run was about 80 million stamps, but listen to this, plus 2.5 million that were going to be reserved for dealers. Now, if that tells you nothing else, it tells you this was a very popular issue with collectors and with the general public. It wasn't just stamp collectors. It wasn't just philatelists that were going after this issue. I don't know that there would have been that much demand. Well, I know there wouldn't have been that much demand were it not for the fact that the public was extremely interested, not just in these stamps, but in books that were issued about the celebration of the Silver Jubilee. There were maps, there were all kinds of ephemera that were being published at this point in 1935 in celebration. Now remember, 1935, we're still in the middle of a very painful depression. But that didn't stop stamp collectors and others from pretty much buying out the entire press run. There were some examples where excess were returned to the post office and destroyed, but by and large, this was a complete sellout. And here you can see an example of somebody, well, this is the receipt from the General Post Office for somebody that had ordered from the post office in Jamaica, and this is in July 30th of 1935, a set of stamps. You can see it a little bit more clearly here. This is the postmaster saying, acknowledge receipt of your letter, and I'm sending you one of the 1 penny, 2 of the penny halfpenny, 1 of the 6 pence, and 1 of the 1 shilling. So this was very common. You had a lot of these orders going out from individuals to the General Post Office in different colonies. Printing responsibilities were allocated among the three printers. Waterlow got 25.5 million, De La Rue 25, and Bradbury Wilkinson 26. That doesn't add up precisely to the 80. There were other stamps that were printed beyond these. Talking about, in particular, the 10 colonies and dominions that issued their own non-omnibus issues. That's where the 80 comes from. The 80 million comes from. So De La Rue and Bradbury Wilkinson each received a duplicate of the master dies for both the frame and the vignette, and then they made their own plates. Well, when you do something like that, especially when there's such a huge rush because we're getting close to the date when they're supposed to be issued, all kinds of varieties resulted. And there are a lot of plate varieties. Stanley Gibbons, SG, documents for each of the three different printers a number of different varieties. The A, B, C, D, and E that I hand wrote here. This is by the way, this is a photocopy out of the Stanley Gibbons Commonwealth album. Towards the back is where they describe all the different omnibus issues from the colonies. This was really the first of the omnibus issues in 1935. So for Bradbury Wilkinson, you can see that there were 5 varieties, and collectors are fly speckers. That B variety, you can see it in the enlargement. This is the short extra flagstaff. It came from plate 2, row 2, the leftmost stamp, stamp number 1, column number 1. And it's just that little vertical line sitting next to the flagpole that makes this a documented variety, one of 5 that Stanley Gibbons documents for Bradbury Wilkinson. I should point out that the philatelic group that specializes in the Silver Jubilees, not surprisingly, called the Silver Jubilees, the King George V Silver Jubilee Study Circle. It has the unique characteristic of having a name longer than its membership list, I think. But they have documented far in excess of the 5 that are laid out here, and they are all constant plate varieties. Gibbons is pretty conservative and left it at just these 5 for the Bradbury Wilkinson. There you can see the faint double flagstaff. That's the E variety. De La Rue has only 4 varieties, F, G, H, and I, including that really minor one for F, which is a diagonal line by the turret. So we're really talking about fly specking here. For the Waterlow plate varieties, again, there are 4 of those, and again, they're pretty subtle. The kite and horizontal log in the upper left corner, you can see the arrow pointing to what's been called a kite, and down in the bottom right, you can see the horizontal log, which doesn't look a lot different than the rest of the vignette, but it only appears on row 10, the bottom row, in the 6th position on plate 2B of the Waterlow plates. Now, these varieties, for the most part, not consistently, but for the most part, show up on all 4 of the different omnibus varieties, the 4 different stamps that were issued. Not always the case, because sometimes the vignette plate, and these are all in the vignette, it's not the frame that has the varieties, it's the vignette, but not all of the vignette plates were used for printing all of the 4 different denominations. Let's talk a bit about Marcophily, which some people have called the poor man's postal history. If you can afford buying stamps on cover, that's what you'll go ahead and do. If you can't afford it, you go after just the cancellations. Now here, for example, in the Jamaica issue, you can see St. Ann's Bay in the upper right corner. The lower right corner, that is Kingston, which is the largest city, capital city in Jamaica, and a pretty common cancellation, the St. Ann's Bay, not all that common. The other 2 are barely understandable, barely intelligible, but with hard work, the identity can be sussed out. And Marcophilus, while they prefer pretty socked on the nose examples like that St. Ann's Bay, beggars can't be choosers. We will take whatever we can get. I will tell you that I admit to being a Marcophilist myself. And for example, in Ceylon, which issued, now Sri Lanka, which issued the Omnibus issue, at the time of its issue, there were over 900 post offices on the island of Ceylon with different cancellations. So I've been trying to collect for the Omnibus issue of Ceylon all of those 900 possible cancellations. I'm about a third, maybe 40% of the way there, but I've got a long way to go. So Marcophily can be a lot of fun, a lot of challenge. You got to go through a lot of used stamps to find 900 different post offices. Let's talk about some postal history examples, by which I really mean covers. Postal history is a study discipline, but people use the term loosely to mean covers, and if you'll bear with me, I will use the term postal history to mean covers here. But you know, at the front end of the spectrum, you've got something like this corner card that identifies a hotel, and this was a guest at one of the local hotels in Bermuda that was sending a letter back home to Boston. So collecting the corner cards and other advertising aspects of covers is always a lot of fun. But it can get a lot more serious than that when you look at the other end of the spectrum. Now, this isn't in the Caribbean, but I wanted to point this out as a very special example of something that was going on. Opened by censor is the censor tape on top. It is sealed with a postal censor Cyprus. It's a registered cover. It was being mailed. I'm not great at reading Greek, but I got this address translated using the APS translation service, which is a free service to APS members. If you don't know about it, you really should. They translate pretty much the entire planet, a few holes in their coverage, but everything, including shorthand, can be translated by these wonderful folks. So I had them translate this for me, and the addressee here is a holy man in Greece. So this was being mailed from Cyprus to Greece, and I think you can see more clearly here that the date on this, if you look at that expanded cancellation on the back, now that's the receiving mark, it is the 27th of November, 1935. There was no war going on at the time. Why was there censorship? Well, there was censorship because there was an open rebellion going on in Cyprus at the time, and the local colonial authorities clamped down on the entire island and implemented, among other things, postal censorship to try and suppress the rebellion. I think it started in 1931. The only reason I'm showing you this example is it's on subject for the Silver Jubilees. But here's an example of postal censorship, not during a time of war, but it was a time of local rebellion. Okay. Other aspects of collecting covers of postal history have to do with uncommon origins. Now, this is from the Bahamas, but the postmark is 8 Mile Rock. This is an absolutely standard Empire rate letter, penny halfpenny, canceled from a really obscure, very tiny post office in the town, village really, of 8 Mile Rock. So you can collect rarities that have nothing to do with the stamp, but have everything to do with the cancellation. So here you've got uncommon origin. The other side of that transaction, of course, is the uncommon destination. Here we're going from Trinidad to Argentina, Buenos Aires. And Trinidad is right off the coast of South America, off the coast of Brazil. Next country south is Argentina, but there was not all that much communication between the two in 1935. So this is an unusual, not necessarily a rare, but an uncommon destination. This letter was sent airmail at $2.40, and there was advertising.
No mail yet?
Hello? Okay. It was advertising Imperial typewriters. It was canceled in Port of Spain, the capital of Trinidad. The rate was 48 cents per half ounce airmail. And this weighed up to, there was 5 increments, weighed up to 2.5 ounces. Here's an even more interesting destination, again going from Trinidad, but to the Sudan. So you can pick up some very interesting rarities if you're looking through the cover boxes at stamp shows. You remember stamp shows. I hope they come back, I truly do. So here's just a wonderful find that I was going through the common run-of-the-mill boxes at a stamp dealer, and I don't remember what stamp show it was. Okay, so uncommon destinations, all kinds of other things that go on in postal history. Here's an example of something that's crassly philatelic from the Cayman Islands. This is a registered envelope that was sent parcel post. It's about a 6x8 or 6x9 envelope. This does not represent any rate at all. It was mailed from Little Cayman, one of the Cayman Islands, and was sent over to England. But even by airmail, parcel post, and registered, the 6 shillings on here don't represent a real rate. On the other hand, there are all kinds of multiple rates out there, such as this example, which was a registered airmail cover to the United States from the Bahamas, and at 2 shillings 10 pence, it flew to Miami, and then from there on to Swampscott, Massachusetts. Got there pretty quickly for 1935. The rate here is 8 pence per half ounce of airmail plus the 2 pence for registration. So this item weighed up to 2 ounces. I already showed you something that I declared to be patently philatelic. This one may be. One of the very popular aspects of collecting the postal history of the Silver Jubilees is to try to put the entire set together and come up with a legitimate rate, not just over franking to get the complete set on a cover. So it's probably philatelic, but it does represent a real rate. 1 shilling 5 pence is in fact the real rate. That's registered by air to New York and then onward by surface, by ship, from New York to London. Question I have is, did it really travel by air to New York? You can see the crayon scribbling over the airmail etiquette in the lower left corner. Typically, if part of a route is by air and the remainder is not, there's an auxiliary mark called a jusqu'à mark, which means it's French for up until, or something similar to that. But in this case, there was no jusqu'à mark, but the airmail etiquette was scribbled on. Now, does that mean that it got to New York, at which point the post office in New York City applied that mark? Or does it mean that it didn't get any airmail treatment at all, even though it was requested? On the back, you can see that it departed St. Thomas with a registry mark on the 3rd of December, didn't get to New York until the 9th of December. I speculate that it went by ship straight up to New York. Otherwise, you might see a Florida cancellation, a transit mark, because it is registered. The other thing to keep in mind for an example like this is that airmail service between the Virgin Islands and the mainland of the United States was once a week. So if it had just missed the flight, which might have been, I'm guessing, maybe December 2nd or something like that, if it had missed that flight, it would have had to wait a week, and this way it got there a day or so quicker. So my guess is this never saw the airmail service for which the cover has 4 different frankings on it. All right, so another aspect of collecting the postal history of the omnibus issues is seen in this example. Here we've got a Madame Joseph forgery. The stamps are real. Madame Joseph was a forger, existed during World War II. Madame Joseph was a he, not a she. That was a nom de guerre. And Madame Joseph is most famous, well, secondarily most famous. He's most famous for doing all of these fake cancellations, but also very famous for having saved the lives of hundreds or perhaps thousands of Jews during World War II by giving them forged passports and papers to get out of Nazi-dominated Europe. So Madame Joseph, even though he was active as a philatelic forger up to the 1960s, interestingly enough, was also a hero, at least by this measure. So what we've done is gone over different aspects of collecting the Silver Jubilees with a focus on the Caribbean. And I hope you enjoyed the journey.
Really? Oh, that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun, particularly the the end there, Gary. Wow. With the madam.
Okay. So I'll happily deal with any questions you might have.
Yeah, what do we have, friends? Gary, can you? Yeah, you got it. This way we can see the gallery. And friends, feel free. If you'd prefer to ask your questions. Oh, Marty Longo is saying, great story. Tom Bowman's giving a thumbs up. Yeah. Hey, Stuart. Thank you. Yep. All right. So when you stop sharing your screen, then we can go into a gallery view. Then I can see if anybody wants to. There we go.
Okay.
Friends, do we have any comments or inquiries for Gary? What's your favorite? Oh, here. What's your favorite part of the story, Gary? What got you interested in collecting that series?
Oh, well, even though I research about a ton of different things and write about lots of different aspects, there are only two real areas of specialization that I have. One is the West African colony of Gambia, and the other is the Silver Jubilees. I fell in love with the design. I think they are among the most beautifully designed stamps in the British Empire. And, you know, going across 49 different colonies, it was interesting to me because I had the opportunity, as opposed to just focusing on one country or one colony, to look at the same stamp across 49 of them. So it was just a great collecting opportunity. There are lots and lots of rarities out there. There are some real challenging combinations, rate combinations to come up with. And if postal history is your thing, then there's just endless opportunities to pick up collectibles that are not very expensive. So you can build a collection, especially true with Marcophily, for example, that, you know, you can spend $1 or $10 going after a rare cancellation. On cover, those might be very pricey items, but if you're interested in learning geography and learning the different cancellations, the different post offices that were functioning in the different colonies,
That's cool. And somebody, just so I can circle back, you had mentioned, were you kidding? Because I never know with you if you're being sarcastic. Are there really 900 post offices, or you know?
The island of Ceylon, which is 25,000 square miles, so pretty small, had over 2,500 different post offices with about 3,500 different cancellation devices identified.
Why?
The 900 that I pointed to are only those that were open during the use of the Silver Jubilees. There's 2,500 different post offices, which is like one every 12 square miles. It speaks very, very specifically to the level of literacy in this island nation. You know, at the time it was a colony, but there are still, between the Sinhalese population, which is about 80%, and the Tamils up north, the rebel group, both sides were extremely literate, Tamils especially so. So that it's not all that surprising that you'd have that many post offices. You learn a lot about an island and its economics and its economy by studying philately. That's just a great example. Why would there be that many? Well, high degree of literacy, lots of remote locations, but surrounding every tea or coffee plantation was a vast area, and the center of town had a grocery store and a post office.
And they each had their own cancellations. And that's what
Yep.
Marcophily is.
Marcophily is the collecting of cancellations,
It's crazy.
the postmarks.
So somebody was asking, is there a site, and while you were talking, I was over here on the Google, but is there a site that we can look up all the different post offices around the world?
Ooh, around the world. I'm not aware of a single website that has attempted that. Mm-hmm. There are websites that specialize, in one country or another. For the United States, for example, there have been, I think, 180,000, listen to that, 180,000 different post offices. Some of them winked out of existence and winked back into existence, depending on whether the postmaster, who was a farmer, might have died or something like that, and then it closed until a new postmaster was appointed. So 180,000 in the United States alone at different points in time. And if you go to postalhistory.com, which is a commercial website, that's Jim Fortey's postal history commercial website, he has built a wonderful research tool where you can look up with an alphabetic search any of these post offices in the United States. It'll tell you state, county, when it was open, when it was closed. If it went through a couple of those cycles, it'll give you the entire list. So you can go to Jim Fortey's postalhistory.com website. He very generously donated that database to Tony W.'s U.S. Postal Bulletins website. So you can go uspostalbulletins.com and look up all of the U.S. post offices on that site as well. So there's lots of different ways you can go about it. Different countries have their own specialized areas as well.
Yeah, Kurt says for Hawaii post office is hawaiianstamps.com.
Yep.
That's cool.
Yep. Yeah.
And so this is the British.
Why?
And so
because it's the yes or because of her apartment?
Makes its own Jubilee stamp. Is that what you were saying too? The 42 colonies?
There were 49 colonies that agreed to participate in this omnibus design. Okay, there were another 10 colonies or dominions like Canada and Australia that issued their own designs. Southwest Africa, South Africa, Northern Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia. A lot of them decided they wanted to do their own design. Some of them started well in advance of the UK itself, and really started late in 1934, but before the initiative for the omnibus issues got going.
Omnibus. I have to actually look that up. Omnibus. Oh, that's really cool. Tom Bowman.
No.
Well, you're unmuted.
When you said omnibus, I said, watch, there's an issue of an omnibus in the U.S. stamps. You may get that.
Well, a volume containing several novels or other items previously published separately. So I made an inference and I get it now. That's a really cool way to collect stamps. That's
yeah,
really cool.
And the Brits did it a lot. The French did it to an even greater extent. France and colonies, which is a wonderful collecting area and really badly neglected in my view. I hope it comes back to popularity, but France and colonies has an intriguing number of omnibus issues as well. Beautiful stamps.
So each one of those colonies is following suit, or like does the mother country release it, or?
Oh, everything was printed among the omnibus issues. Everything was printed in Great Britain and shipped to the colonies.
But but then each one was a little bit different depending on the colony?
The design was identical. What varied were the color combinations, the denominations, because each had local currency that wasn't necessarily pence. Sometimes it was dollars and cents. India, had annas. So each of the colonies had their own denominations. And also the name of the colony appeared uniquely on the frame as well. So the 49 omnibus colonies had three different aspects: the name, the color, and the denominations that were unique to them.
And then and I see you, Tom, but with the perfs, the one, it had the horseshoe, it had the,
the specimens? Yeah, those were UPU, Universal Postal Union specimens. If you're a member of the Universal Postal Union, and if you're a real country, you pretty much have to be. You sent specimen examples of the stamps you were issuing to the UPU in Switzerland, and they distributed it to the various members of the UPU. And at different points in time, there were different numbers of members. And at different points in time, each country had to submit either 3 or 5 duplicate copies of those specimens for each of the members. But it all went from the issuing country, defaced somehow or other with the word specimen on it so that they couldn't be postally used, shipped to the UPU, and then the UPU distributed it among the member post offices.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Bowman.
Gary, and there again, when you said different colors, didn't the UPU want all the countries, like the certain denominations had to be a certain color, so it was quicker for someone to figure out?
That was true beginning in the 1890s and ceased to be the case, I think, in the 1920s. I'm not sure when the color coding was abandoned.
I'm reading over. I don't think that was a 2-all unless it was, Jack. I don't think so. Does anybody else in here, by way of hand, like the omnibus? Or is Gary the Lone Ranger here?
Not the first time.
True. I haven't even known you that long, but it's true. Okay, there we go. Jack.
Hello, Gary. Thank you very much for such a nice and wonderful presentation. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure.
Especially, about the King George V, is our royal's former president.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, and also he was the first. To be honest, we can say he was the first. We can use the royal, because he gave us this word, royal. And when his father allowed us to use the royal, and then he was the first. He became the first, the president. We call it the Royal Philatelic Society in London.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and also he had sent a letter to the vice president, another Crawford, I think. Is Earl, yeah, Earl Crawford, and then and then told him, okay, we'd better add like the Royal Philatelic Society, and then ending with London, and that means the headquarters in London, something like that.
Yeah. Well,
And
I mean,
that
go ahead.
letter was in the Royal now, in the Royal Society now, in the headquarters, yeah, in London.
Mhm. Well, Lord Earl Crawford, of course, was a philatelic bibliophile as well as a huge stamp collector, and and his library is now one of the foundations of the British Library.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And yeah, that's right. And also, I think we got internet library, and we can use and read most of his materials now through we call it something like global philatelic library or something. Yeah.
Not sure.
Yeah, it is how to say, originally I think Frank Wharton, RDP, our past president,
Yep.
he started this work together with American National Postal Museum and British Library, and also the Royal, and a few organizations work together, and then they try to upload as much more as possible the materials, all the books, everything. Sure. And digitalized, yeah, we call it, so we can use it.
Yeah. Well, we've got Scott Tiffany on this group here, and he could really speak better than I to how the Philatelic Union catalog, which is the APRL's catalog, and what
you can have
what
the soup.
Frank is doing as well.
Yeah.
So the Union catalog is really a product of several groups.
Oh, take garbage out.
Alt.
You good now? Okay.
No.
The soap at Jubilees issued in 1935 when George and his wife were demonic for 25 years, just before he died. And what he did for his collection that the Queen now has.
Can't see who that was. I'm muting everybody. And then Scott Tiffany. Scott Tiffany, go ahead.
Okay, so the Philatelic Union catalog that we have is really a cooperative group between the APRL, between the National Postal Museum, and the Royal in London. And so we've put together a number of different catalogs that are sort of entered into our database. I would also point people to the Global Philatelic Library, which is also online, which includes several European philatelic libraries as well. But the catalog that we have through the APRL really includes mostly North American libraries, as well as the Royal. And the Global Philatelic Library also includes our catalog, but it also includes a number of really interesting European philatelic libraries as well.
Excellent. All right, friends, thank you. On that note, Scott Tiffany, thank you so much. Can you just plug real quick before we say adieu? And thank you. If you could just plug the Adopt a Book, please, that we're kicking off.
Sure. So what we're kicking off today is the opportunity to adopt a book in the library. And what it is just an opportunity to pick out a book in our collection, have a book plate put in that book in your name. And for various sort of levels of donating, we have the general collection, we have the research collection, we have the archives. You can actually pick out an item from our online catalog and sort of donate towards the library. And what the donations will go towards are our digitization projects in the library. So if you want to look on the website, it's on the front page of the website at the top. You can click on that link and it can take you right to where you can adopt a book for the library. Thanks, Heidi.
Many thanks, Scott. My pleasure. And thank you, friends, for joining us. Again, I said in the chat, but I do want to say to all of you that I'm looking at and your little circles, thank you so much for your graciousness. Truly appreciate you all making it over to our stamp chat. Gary, as always, fantastic information. And thank you, you know, for always, well, you make me feel very comfortable asking questions. And thank you. I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels that way. Thank you so much, friends, for joining APS Stamp Chats. For your membership tomorrow, we will have 2 Stamp Chats, one at 3 o'clock Eastern Time with our directors. Bring your questions, your comments. And then at 7 p.m., we'll have Mr. Howard Ingram. He oversees ESPERS. He'll be talking about African Canadians on stamps. So you'll want to check that out, the new Canadian hockey stamps. They'll talk about that as well. So thanks so much. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, friends. Bye.
Hey, bye-bye, Gary. Thank you.
So long,
Bye-bye.
Jack.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye.